Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today at the Community Health Endowment. We're so glad that you're here and willing to spend the afternoon, or at least a portion of the afternoon, with us today to talk about a very important topic. I think it's fair to say that nobody probably necessarily starts out to be a caregiver. It's probably something that comes to us in some form or another. It may start with running errands or taking your aging parent to the doctor. But as time goes by, that time commitment changes, those needs may change, and all of a sudden, what enters into the picture may be things like tough choices and financial strains or medical emergencies, and things begin to evolve. And so many of you know exactly what I'm saying, those of you who are here in this room, because you're among those 1 of every 5 adults today who can be considered a family caregiver. So what we hope to offer you today is support if you are a caregiver, to encourage you and to give you some perhaps needed encouragement and guidance on caring for a loved one. But what we're also hoping to do is prepare people and provide people information if you are believing that you will become a caregiver at some point in your life. I'm a caregiver for my dad. He's 91 years old, and I serve as his primary caregiver. I consider it an honor. I consider it a privilege, but it is also sometimes very difficult. And there are people here on this panel who not only have walked that journey, but who have prepared other people to walk it. And so we're really excited to hear from them. So I am here to have the distinct honor of introducing our moderator, Christie Hinrichs, who is the president and CEO of Tabitha. And since 2010, Christie has served as president and CEO of Tabitha, a very, very important institution in our community. It's a nonprofit. It's also a mission-centered provider of health services for older adults, headquartered at the corner of 48th and of Randolph. I was over there this morning at 7 a.m. and things were bustling. Having spent the majority of her adult life in service to seniors with a steadfast and sincere commitment to improving their quality of life, Christie has been instrumental in the growth of Tabitha's physical presence in southeast Nebraska. More than 1,200 employees, 1,500 active volunteers, and countless faithful donors. Tabitha serves more than 2,500 seniors and their families every single day. Christie is pursuing her master's degree in organizational leadership with an emphasis on servant leadership, which is certainly required in the job that she does. She serves as treasurer on the Leading Age National Board. No one, I think, would be better equipped in Lincoln to lead this discussion today, so I'm happy to welcome you, Christie, and thank you for being here.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. Welcome to all of you. It's great to have you with us today. I'm certainly going to introduce our guests very quickly. You want to hear their stories, and we absolutely want to have time to answer your questions. But I wanted to just give you a couple of facts to sort of kick us off today. First of all, I think we should be grateful to this opportunity to have this conversation, because it's the conversation that needs to be had but never gets had, right? It's a hard conversation, first of all. It's one that takes time and thoughtfulness, and most of us are busy actually doing the work instead of thinking about how to plan for the work, right? But as I look out into this room, and I took the liberty of just sort of making some assumptions, but I think most of us probably fall into this category that we've been talking about forever, the old sandwich generation, right? And so statistically, they talk about, especially in America, that, you know, those age 45 to 64 or so are going to find themselves potentially in this caregiver role, planned or unplanned. At least 25%. Some things you read will say 50% of America within that age category is or will be finding themselves in that role of playing caregiver to some extent. And that's the one thing that I want to say, and Lori, thank you for being honest with us and sharing a bit about you and your story, is caregiving takes on a lot of different definitions, right? Some of us are thousands of miles away, and caregiving is still the ultimate responsibility for ensuring mom or dad's or another loved one's safety. Some of it is really active in the day and the life of the aging elder, right? No matter what, you sometimes feel really alone. You definitely feel out of sorts because this isn't the work that you probably made your life's mission or signed up for, so to speak. And like all things, we wait until the moment that the need is there for us to actually think about it. So that idea of planning ahead doesn't come natural to us because we don't have time for it. So you're not looking for a car or noticing what, Toyota has put on the market today because you don't care until you're looking for a car. Then you notice what Toyota has put on the market today. The same is true as we think about what are the solutions that are out there to keep my parent safe. Instead, my parent is in crisis. What are the solutions to help me and my parent get out of crisis? And I hope that's what we can be most helpful about today, is giving you some thoughts about how do we keep myself, my spouse, my loved one, whoever it is, out of crisis by having an awareness of all the resources that exist to help us do that, so that ideally we can avoid the crisis, knowing some of the crises are still going to come no matter what, but if we got some of this planned for, that maybe will feel a little bit less burdensome. So I'm going to turn it over to our two guests and let them do their own introductions and also why they were invited today, what their relationship around seniors or the aging journey is, and how they might be helpful to you in this conversation. We did have one guest who was unable to be with us today, and that is a local woman by the name of Claudia Messinio, and some of you may know her. But she's been a great example who has provided and continues to provide support for actually both aging parents. And so in some cases she's walking along, and in some cases she's really leading or making the decisions for one of her parents. But she has had an opportunity to use both in a proactive way and a reactive way resources that are available to her. And so we'll feed some of her story throughout our conversation as well, so that you have those helpful nuggets to you. So I'm going to turn to Joyce Kubacheck, who's next to me, and she's been with Aging Partners as long as I remember anyway, but I'll let you talk about your story and the work of Aging Partners.
Okay, well, thank you.
Yes.
And I want to thank CHE for offering this event and inviting us to be a part of it. And I want to thank Pat, who's going to speak next, for being willing to join us as a caregiver. I got to invite someone, and I was so pleased that he was able to come. So I like to start when I talk to caregivers. I've been on quite a number of panels to say that I know all of you have unique stories and situations. There's some common things that we can learn from each other about. But right from the get-go, I just wanted you to know that I realize that everyone's situation is a little different. You may find some things today that you take away that apply to you, and some things may not. But in the course of doing it, I think it's fairly common, and you and Lori talked about the emotional part of this, and I think it's important just to think about that as we talk about solutions, because if it was all just logical and knowledge, we could all sort of read a pamphlet or a booklet and, oh, this is the logical thing to do when a person has these problems. But it is never that way in real life, in my experience. And maybe I should tell you a little bit about my experience. I have worked for 39 years at Aging Partners, which is an area agency on aging, and we cover 8 counties. And I started out there as a care manager, but we didn't call it that then, but that's what it was. And our goal is to try to help people stay in the home, in the community, similar to a lot of other agencies in the community. And we're very fortunate in Lincoln that there's a lot of collaboration and coordination between the agencies that try to help older people, which we're very fortunate. It's not always that way everywhere. So in the course of doing that, trying to help people stay at home, our agency spends a lot of time working with caregivers and addressing all the issues that come up when you are a caregiver. And if you're interested in what Aging Partners has to offer, out on the table as you came in, we have a flyer that kind of explains everything we do for caregivers that you might be interested in taking. And also I brought a summary of Aging Partners and all the services we provide, because we're the organization that has the senior centers in our work in our 8 counties, and we have home handyman services, legal services, financial, just a number of things. And also, if you haven't heard of us, some of you may be familiar with our magazine that comes out quarterly, and I brought a few of those, and on the back of the magazine it tells how you can sign up to get that. We have about 12,000 people in our area that receive the magazine, and there's always 2 pages in there directed toward caregivers. And we also have a website. If you go to the City of Lincoln website and put aging in as a search term, or if you just go to your search engine for Aging Partners, or it's on this material, everything I'm talking about is all on there also. So it's down the road. If you wanted to read our magazine, you could do it that way also. Back to my journey working with caregivers. As a care manager, I go out and see an older person a lot of times in their home, and their family may be there. Their daughter, their son, their granddaughter, their neighbor, their friend. And so they're a part of that whenever possible. I think it is a good idea to have all the people involved work together. Of course, the person we're trying to help has to agree to that way of operating. So that's one of the first things we have to check off the list. Are they open to having it? But I sometimes say to my clients, if their name is Gladys, I might say, we're Team Gladys. You know what your wishes are and what your goals are and what your hopes are. But maybe your energy level is down at this point in your life. You're ill. You've never had to go through this before, so you don't know where to go. But what I can offer is a little energy and a little information about resources, like we've talked about. So if we all band together, I think that's a good thing. I think all these kinds of conversations are very helpful to think about. Who is the team for the person I'm trying to help with? How do we all work together as well as possible? And I know we'll get into more of that. Because I think ultimately what it comes down to is that relationship you have with that person you're trying to help, and the relationships you have with the other people that are involved. And how good is that communication? Is somebody feeling like they're carrying more of the burden of the caregiving than somebody else? How do you talk about those things? So that's part of the relationship. And I think we all, when I thought about, they asked me to think what I thought about caregiving, we all have to kind of accept up front that it has its ups and downs. I mean, some of the greatest joys of my life have been doing caregiving with people in my life, and both professionally and in my personal life. But also some of the low points of my life have been during that process. And I have read many times that research shows that the number one emotion that caregivers experience is guilt. And I don't know if that's true for everyone, but I know in my work, it's easy to feel guilty because no matter how much we do, there's probably always more that we could do. So accepting that kind of up front, trying to let go of some of that and say, a few years ago I read a book, and the main thing I remember about it is the title, and it was for caregivers. It was called Your Best is Good Enough. So, because at that point in your life when you're caregiving, what you have to offer is what you have to offer. And what you may need to do is bring in places like a care manager, an agency of some type like Tabitha or other people that can help supplement your team, because your best is good enough, but look at communicating and bringing the group together. And I'll end with, I think the common thing between the kind of work I do as a care manager or as supervising care managers and what a caregiver does is we both offer a couple of things that I think older people in this position need. One of them, I think people need an advocate, because even though they may, at some points in their life, be very articulate, when you're ill, when you have some kind of visual or hearing impairment, when somebody doesn't know you very well, sometimes you just kind of get put in the category of old person, possibly isn't thinking straight. And somebody who knows you, who has that relationship, can advocate for you and say, no, this is important to this person for this reason. And the other thing, and I'll then let Pat talk, because we'll have questions, and I want to talk about the things that you're interested in. But I want to put a plug in for listening, because I think our culture is too busy now. Everybody's on their phone or their tablet, or they have to get somewhere. And sometimes I think I hear this little person in my head snapping their fingers like, Joyce, you've been here a half hour, you've been here an hour, you've been here 2 hours, whatever it is. But I think if we truly listen and really hear what the people that we're trying to help are saying, we will do such a better, more efficient job of helping them, and it will be a much more of a rewarding experience. So if I can't say I really can claim wisdom, but I'm beginning to feel like, once you've worked somewhere 39 years, you might be able to claim a little experience. You've been there every day and you've seen a lot of things. And so that's kind of my nutshell comment on caregiving. And with that, I will turn it back to you to introduce Pat.
Great, thank you. And I'm just going to grab a couple of nuggets that Joyce shared before we turn it over to you, Pat. So a couple of key things that I think that Joyce pointed out. First of all, I think maybe the greatest gift that we leave you with today is her advice of saying the best is good enough, right? I mean, if there's something that you leave here with today, I hope you heard that and will walk away and remind yourself that when the going gets tough, because I know there will be really tough days. So thank you for sharing that. It's a tremendous gift. The other thing that is really important that she talked about is listening, and I hope you probably all went, because I don't listen to my kids. I walked in and I asked Becky one question. I'm like, I think I already asked you this and I don't know the answer that you gave me. I didn't even listen when I asked the question, right? So, I mean, if any of you are even kind of like me, I know the answer to the question. We're just not great listeners today because our minds are going crazy because we're inundated with responsibilities and information. But I think listening is key. And, one of the takeaways that I want to send with you is that listening for the needs of your parent or who you might be responsible for as a caregiver in a caregiver role is really different than just plain listening. Because what we know about the aging process is none of us want to do it. Right? I mean, have you ever talked to anybody other than me? Like, I actually love getting older because I love wisdom, like Joyce pointed out. I'm like, the older I get, the smarter I become. Like, life's experiences are awesome. But, I mean, most conversations that you have, right? I mean, that's the dread that people will admit to you. I mean, we imagine this future that's not the one that we think of ourselves in terms of vibrancy today, right? And so because of that, we also start to kind of twist the truth a little bit about our reality for two primary reasons. One, because we ourselves don't want to admit that we might be changing or declining or becoming more vulnerable, which is all the things that we've worried about for our lifetime, right? Two, because if we are a parent or a spouse, our job is as much to protect you as you are trying to reach in to help and protect us, right? So we have this really mutual but pounding against each other job that we've got going on. I'm trying to make you think I'm in a lot better shape than I am, because the last thing I want to do is become a burden to you. I already feel guilty that I can no longer make my meals the way I used to, or that I almost started a fire in my house last night, or that you had to come and get me and take me to the doctor because I can no longer drive myself, right? I'm already struggling with that. But then I have to put that burden on you, and I know that you're trying to get your kids to blah, 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 or whatever it is. Another statistic that is common to us and that we often share with our caregivers and their family members is that 70% of those of us who are in caregiving roles but also have full-time jobs we will decline promotions or walk away from our jobs in this sort of obligatory state that we feel we have to take on or feel a need to take on for our loved one as a caregiver. And that in some ways ties to the guilt piece that Joyce talked about. I mean, some of that's driven simply by guilt, but some of that is driven by the fact that we really do believe there aren't other alternatives. And that's the breath of fresh air that we bring today, is that there are other alternatives. We just don't know about them. I'm kind of a Shark Tank junkie, and last night, I don't know if any of you watched it, it was probably one of the rerun ones anyway, but it was this advertisement on like drone lessons. Because have any of you ever stopped to think about that suddenly the drone showed up, but who taught people to drive drones safely and effectively? And I was like, that's really genius. Like, somebody's actually going to protect us from the runaway drones because now there's a lesson plan for the drone drivers. But the same is true for us as caregivers. Like, we don't know where to find the lesson plan for caregiving because there's not a tidy lesson plan or something that you sign up at the local college that prepares you for this work. But here's the good news, particularly in Lincoln, Lancaster County, is Aging Services in Tabitha can be resources for you like that. So, Joyce talked about we're blessed in this community to have great collaboration among providers who provide supportive services for seniors and their caregivers and their families, right? But what I would say about Aging Services in Tabitha specifically is we are a free call to get you started. We may never provide you support beyond our initial conversation because you may never need us again. But if we can save you the trouble of not knowing which page to turn to in the phone book, I know that doesn't actually exist anymore. But the Google search that you're going to do instead, let us be a familiar and fond face to you who we are going to just listen to you ramble, whether it's crying or exacerbation or frustration or anger or a combination of all the above. We're trained to pick the nugget, the most important nugget out of what you said to us and help connect you down the path that will get you the first thing checked off your list that then can move you to the second thing and to the third thing. And until you just have someone lift the big burden, which is way out here because you're only trying to get to the end and really you just need the solution to the first step, it becomes overwhelming. So it's a free phone call to Tabitha or Aging Services. There are others like us in the community, but call and ask for help before you spend loads of time and energy just trying to find your way yourself. That's the most important advice. Pat, thank you for being willing to share your story with us, because Pat comes to us as what we call adult children influencers, right? Mm-hmm. Or advocates, or insert whatever role you're currently playing in that caregiving capacity. And Pat, we'd love for you to just share your role and the challenges and the victories that you've had maybe as a caregiver.
Okay. First of all, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks to Lori, and thanks to Christie, and thanks to Joyce. This isn't going to be real fluid. If I had a blank piece of paper here, I would say this is my script. Yes. I don't have as scripted as Christie and Joyce did, but I'm sure pieces will come, and as you ask questions, I'll remember things that I don't remember at the moment right now. But it's interesting. The term caregiver is foreign to me. I don't think of myself as a caregiver. Yeah. I think of myself as the responsible son. So I'm one of 7 siblings. I have 6 others, but I'm the primary caregiver. I have to give credit to my sister. She lives here in Lincoln, and she's been a huge help. So I guess that term would apply to both of us. But and as far as stories go, again, this isn't going to be a very fluid one, but I didn't even start thinking about my story because I didn't think of it as my story. I really think of it as as what's tomorrow going to bring. I mean, I don't even know what's going to happen tomorrow. So I don't think about the past. I just think about trying to go forward. Fortunately, my wife and I live in here in Lincoln. We have 4 kids. They're all here in Lincoln. But we're empty nesters, so thankfully for that, I still go to my son's house and help him build a deck, and go over to my other son's house and run the roto-rooter down the drain to, because it got plugged up or whatever. So I'm still doing those things, but I also, my mom calls me, 2 or 3 times a day, some days more, some days she doesn't call at all. So I don't, it wasn't until Joyce called me and she started, talking about your story that I even thought I had a story. And I know I do, but I don't think of it as a story. I just think of it as part of my life. And it goes back about 2 or 3 years when my dad started having trouble and they started needing help. So, I didn't know what to do. I was the closest one, so, I didn't know what to do. And just from my job at the fire department, I'd ran across June Peterson a lot in, just doing city business. And I talked to June and said, kind of asked her what I should do. And she said, we got lots of help for you. And it's like, oh, great, literally, that didn't sound like I was very thankful, but I was very thankful that there was somewhere to go. And ultimately, that conversation led me to other people in Aging Partners, and ultimately to Jean Holt, who I give credit. I throw her name out there because I want to give credit to Jean for all the help that she's given me, and she still gives me today. So that connection with Aging Partners through June Peterson, who's been she's been retired how long?
2 years.
2 years. So again, my story goes back 2 or 3 years. Once I thought about my story and where it started, that's kind of where it started. And so I'm still with Jean today, very thankful that she does what she does, and I have a place to go to for help. Her help has been, I'd ask her a question and she'd give me an answer, and I'm going like, wow, she really knows what she's doing. And then I was really impressed when it actually came to fruition, like what she told me was actually what happened. It's like, wow. So then I was really impressed because not only did she give me a straight answer, not only did she give me an answer right away, but it was the right answer. And so I was always very impressed with the help I got from Aging Partners, and so it was a good resource. But so my story started 2 or 3 years ago. My dad his health started failing a little bit, and my dad actually passed away a couple months ago. So now it's just my mom. And I get to be her caregiver. So I'm like Lori. I feel privileged and honored to do it, and I step up. I step up and do it with no regrets, but there's a whole range of emotions because I have other siblings, and it is time consuming. And like I said, I don't know what tomorrow holds. I don't know what task there will be tomorrow. I don't know when that call is going to come. I've gotten calls all times of the day and night. One time at 2 o'clock in the morning from one of my firefighters who's in the ambulance at my mom and dad's house and telling me that we're taking my mom to the hospital and can't leave my dad alone. So I get up and go over to stay with my dad while they transport my mom to the hospital. So it's things like that I don't know if that's going to happen again tomorrow or the next day or whatever. So that's just kind of the way it seems to work. You don't really plan for what's going to happen next. You take care of the issue at the moment and kind of get it resolved, and then you kind of move on. So I'd be better at this if you asked me questions, or if
I just wanted to say, in case people didn't realize, that the help you got from Jean is a care manager at Aging Partners, and so she would have done an assessment of the needs of Pat's parents and worked with them and Pat to set up any services that they might need, and that's similar to what we would do with other families. So just in case you didn't realize what her role was. So that was what I was saying about in the course of helping people, it's a team effort, you know, the caregiver and the older person who might need some help and I'll tell Pat, well, one, I know Pat is a good, you know, not shy. I guess you can't be in your position, but also that I thought it would be great for someone who is a man who is a caregiver, because I think we sort of stereotype that all daughters are who are the caregiver, and that's not true. In my experience always, a lot of daughters are great caregivers and granddaughters and grandsons, but I just thought it's nice to highlight that a lot of sons are out there being there for their family.
Yeah, thanks. You know, there was a lot of the stuff that Jean did, I didn't know it was part of the program. I mean, from my perspective, it's just, I had an issue and she had a solution, and it's like she came out and did an assessment. I didn't know that was part of the program. I just thought she was offering help for me. I didn't know that could be available to anyone. And when I went to her office to ask a question about finances or something, you know, I didn't know that was part of the program. I just had a problem. I needed a solution, and I went and presented my problem, and I came up with the solution. So I didn't know. I still don't know what all the services are that Aging Partners has available. I just know what I needed, and went and asked the question and found a solution.
How would you be able to, or willing to elaborate on that a little bit? You talked about, as an example, then financial services. You had some questions and they helped you with that. As you think back, what are some of the other services that you did tap into that were sort of instrumental in helping you with what you needed?
Well, one of the big ones was, and this is the joy and the frustration maybe part of the story, but at some point in my dad's progression, he needed more care than Mom could provide. So went to Aging Partners and, you know, asked them what the next step would be, having no idea what that next step would be. She walked me through it. And so then I stepped into the state health and human services world because that's the next step. And so was assigned a case manager, and she walked me through that and went through the whole process to get accepted into those programs available there. And the huge frustration for me, and I suppose it's not just me, I suppose it happens to everybody, we did everything that we needed to do, and my mom turned it down. My mom was like, no, you know, he's going to stay here, and I'm going to be the caregiver. And then, you know, so there are frustrations along the way. But I never felt like that I should take away their responsibility to make decisions, at least for my mom. I mean, you know, she's of sound mind and capable of making her own decisions. And people told me, you should just take that away from her. I said, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to take away my mom's ability to make a decision that she, you know, there may be consequences and she may not know the consequences, but maybe I tried to explain the consequences. But I never took away her right and her ability to make decisions about her life and my dad's life. I just didn't feel it was my role to do that. But that's an example of another program or another aspect of service that Aging Partners provided. So.
Thank you, Pat. And I want to just kind of, again, highlight what he's just pointed out, and that is, you know, we all decide what solutions look like, right? So now we know that there are solutions and we've equipped ourselves with them, and so the next step is logical that we use the solutions. But I am sure all of you are feeling like that's not an uncommon scenario, right? I mean, so we've gotten everything tied up with a bow and then the bomb comes. But that goes back to the really important piece about listening. So again, what's most important here? And our idea of living well has to start altering with what their idea of living well becomes as they age, right? So, you know, maybe they can't go out to dinner and you know, do that without great labor or, the support of others, but maybe staying in for dinner because they still get to be together for dinner is the most important thing. And so it's both around accepting what they're saying to us and making sure we're really hearing that, not just the words that they're speaking, but what they mean underneath of that. But also that we begin to train ourselves and our family members about accepting that this looks different today than what we have known or what we may have dreamt of for our loved ones, but it is what they want. And it's why we at Tabitha use this expression carefully, and that is adult-child influencer, because it is about trying our best to influence them to make what we believe are good decisions. They taught us how to make those good decisions, right? This is their fault. But at the end of the day, the most honorable thing to do, except in cases where it's truly just unsafe situations, is to figure out how to work with what they're articulating back to you as a yes or as a no. And sometimes it's a slow go to get somewhere closer to the yes for the sake of you and for the sake of your parent that may be trying to play that caregiver role. The other thing, and you know this if you're in any capacity of a caregiver role or close to a caregiver, is sometimes we do everything we can to take care of our loved one, and we end up putting our own selves at risk from a health perspective, from a financial perspective, from a familial perspective. So, our own family unit may be coming apart while we're trying to help our parent, or our financial situation may be at risk because we've made sacrifices that, lay over here. And again, those are the things that if you can kind of get higher than that and think about all of the players who are still dependent on you during this period of time where you're needed more than ever for your parent, that's when you can step back and say to yourself, how can it be a win-win for everybody? Again, your best is good enough, and maybe mom wants me to be the one sitting with her all afternoon, but I can't do it and still feel like I've got my best work self and my best mom self and my best whatever self. And so what I'm going to negotiate with my mom is that because she wishes for someone to sit with her all afternoon, we're going to find someone who she enjoys visiting with, whom we trust, and who can ensure her safety. And these are the times that I'll check in with her. And, it's about thinking about a plan that looks a little bit different than maybe she defines or you laid out, and meeting somewhere in the middle. But sometimes we forget that life is about negotiations, right? And reaching middle grounds when we're in this state of trying to be respectful, sometimes overcome with guilt, and oftentimes just in a state of crisis, and so you're just reacting. And the most effective thing at that moment seems like, let me just do it, right? So those are the things that, if you can remind yourself, this is still a period of life where negotiations make sense. In order to protect you, your family, and others who are impacted by this. Go ahead, Joyce, yeah.
Well, and that's, I think, really good. And I just wanted to mention two things that we kind of alluded to, but so there's a plan, and it gets, the older person involved says no. What I think we're talking about, too, is knowing all the options, because if I could throw in any other thought that occurred to me when you said that, is we have to stay flexible on what that plan is. And I do meet people sometime who have the plan. If mom or dad needs something, I want them to go to this facility or do this thing. And for whatever reason, those things don't always work out. Maybe they're not affordable, or maybe the older person doesn't want to do that, or for whatever. And so flexibility is so important. And I wanted to mention that, I think I said it, but I don't know if I made it clear, that part of what we have besides care management and help finding respite care is we do have an information and assistance part to our agency. So if you call our main number, which is on the flyer if you take one when you go, or go to our website, people can talk to you. A lot of people use us in that way, similar to how you're talking that they also use Tabitha or other places. But you can call and talk to someone who takes these kinds of questions every day and figure out all the options. And then sometimes you can help somebody, if they're going through a crisis, to narrow it down to maybe the most likely ones that sound the best. So I just wanted to make that point, that I think that's how you can get past that either or thinking. There's always sometimes you don't have perfect choices, but there's usually more than one, and we can usually, I used to have a colleague who used to say, we can't always fix this, but we can usually make it better. We can find something better than where you are.
Yeah, and I hope you heard Joyce talk about earlier the senior centers and the handyman services that Aging Services makes available, because those are so important for a handful of reasons. One of the most important things that we want to continue to maintain for those who may be declining in their health is some sort of social atmosphere, if that's still desirable to them and if they're able, right? Because the stimulation of the mind and body is really what keeps them healthy for as long as possible and home for as long as possible. So if those are the goals that they've articulated them to you, encouraging them to stay involved and take advantage of some of these things that are available to them are key. And I believe they also come with a warm meal, right? So meals and nutrition are also of key importance in this aging journey. And again, you might not be close enough to your parent. Maybe your parent lives in another city or another state. And so when you ask them, did they eat today or what did they eat today, it might not be exactly what the whole truth was, because they don't want you worrying about it. But if you know that they were at the senior center today, you know that at least a full nutritious meal was put in front of them, right? And so that can give you peace of mind to know that if they are hungry, that at least that is there for them to get the nutrition that they need. But the nutrition and the social environments are key to aging as healthy and as strong as possible for as long as possible. A couple of things that Tabitha offers that I think are key to this too. First of all, I keep trying to change the conversation about Tabitha and our continuum of services as post the crisis, because again, that's usually when we get the phone call, is it's after a hospitalization, right? But we can actually keep people out of the hospital with many of the services that we provide, but people don't know about them. Meals on Wheels is like the senior centers, one of the city's hidden gems, but we provide meals every single day to more than 550 people. And what we're doing is giving them the opportunity to stay in their own home longer. And it, at the end of the day, is a win-win for everyone because of its cost effectiveness. But maybe even more important, or as important as the meal, is the volunteer who's delivering the meal. And so just last week, I got another story of how one of our volunteers literally saved someone's life, because that volunteer was the only person that was seeing this senior for, we don't know how long it would have been otherwise, but she had fallen the day previously and was unable to reach anyone. Our volunteer knew to go in and check on her, calls 911, and she's back in her own home today. I mean, so it's the little pieces that if we can put those in ahead of time that help people be and stay successful. The other thing that we work very closely with Aging Partners on and have the opportunity to provide within the city is what we call at Tabitha the Club, and it's Adult Day for seniors. And I would have to tell you, my best day is when I visit the club, because the people who are there are so socially engaged and having the best day of their life while their caregiver is able to go away stress-free for a period of 1 hour or 9 hours, whatever it is, and know that their loved one is cared for, both from a nutrition perspective, from a toileting perspective, from a safety perspective, and from a social perspective. But these are the little hidden gems that unless you need to know about it, there's no reason for you to know about it, but they cause huge reliefs from burdens that you are otherwise just trying to figure out, how am I going to make tomorrow work? I have to be X, and I don't know what to do with mom or dad or whatever. And it's, I love listening to Pat, because you're the most honorable son, and thank you so much for sharing your story. And so many of us do feel like Lori shared too, that it is an honor to care for our loved one and be a caregiver, or not even think of ourselves as that, right? It's just our duty. But frankly, there are many who are really just trying to fit it in, and it's not a lack of love or support. It's just the demands on their lives have them strapped and feeling in that way. And that's okay. It's going back to doing your very best. Well, if you knew that your very best could be even better because these resources were available, it is a low-cost option. Christine Schoening, who has been, working in the field for probably close to as long as Joyce, she always says the best bang for your buck is adult day, and nobody knows about it, nobody uses it. But for $60 a day, you can go do whatever your heart's desire, even if it's get your nails done and get your hair done without having to worry about is mom or dad safe during the period of time that I'm away. These are the kinds of resources that exist in our community that we want people to make sure that they know about. So when you think about handyman services or meals or any of those kinds of things, Pat, were you and your siblings able to just sort of jump in and take care of those things, or were those resources that, these are things we need to plug in as well? How did you utilize some of those?
Well, I think in answering that question, that is part of some of the interesting stuff of my story, in that, you talk about wisdom too, and how maybe it comes with age. At this time in my life, I realized there are differences between men and women, right? I've just figured it out.
It's never too late.
Never too late. I got that part figured out, but what I haven't figured out is how women think. And so let me explain. So I'm perfectly okay. Don't choke.
I did. I already did.
I'm perfectly okay going over to my mom and dad's and fixing the kitchen sink, or fixing the toilet, or fixing the lawnmower, or trimming the trees. I'm okay with that. But when it comes to clipping my mom's toenails, it's like, okay, I did that, okay. But when it comes to washing her back, it's like, okay, I think we got a line here that, and my daughter is okay with that. So that's the difference between, men and women, I think, to some degree. So some of the things, I think we've been able to take care of most of the tasks on our own without having to utilize too many resources outside. But there's definitely, when it comes to things that need to be done, there's definitely things that are better, in my opinion, that I can take. I'm comfortable, let me put it just from my personal perspective, things that I'm comfortable doing and things that I'm not so comfortable doing. So.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Sometimes what caregivers need is that break, because they're not off working, so they're there all the time. And maybe a daughter has moved in with a family, like a mother or father, and that's something that we can provide information on what the respite options are in Lincoln, and if people aren't able to afford that, what programs are available that might help pay for that is something that we can work through with people. That's often a service that caregivers want. We also have, for people that are low income, there is some Older Americans Act funding for supplemental type of services. So for people who can't afford an emergency response system, but their caregiver has to be gone part of the day, sometimes there's help with that. Either some people are able to afford it on their own. If they're low income, we're able to give them assistance sometimes. That's a very popular thing that we help caregivers and the people they take care of with. So just for other examples.
And I don't want to assume that everyone knows what respite is or how it's utilized. And what I would just expand a little bit and say is, maybe it's just an hour or a day at the club at Tabitha, but maybe you really have been planning a long-standing vacation with your family members, and you don't want to break hearts on this end, and you can safely help your loved one be placed for a week's time in a setting where they can be, again, very comfortable, have social support, have meals and safety and security and all those kinds of things. And there are countless options within the community that exist. And so whether it's, Aging Partners that helps you connect that, or whether you call a Continuum Navigator at Tabitha, that's what we're here to do. The thing that I am proud of, and Lori was kind enough to say you can't be a servant leader without doing what I've done for a very long time. Tabitha is 130 plus years old, and we have lived in the same location in Lincoln, Nebraska for that entire time. And the one thing that I truly believe, though I'm not 130 plus to say this for sure, has never changed is that Tabitha has always stood for what is the community that we live within in need of, and are we the answer to that, or can we be the answer to that? So there are many times where you will call us and you will get one of your continuum navigators, and your question leads to a service that we do not provide, but we do know who provides it. And we are just as happy to help you connect and help you take some of that stress and relief as we are for you to have the benefit of utilizing one of our services. So, whether it's a bricks and mortar solution, or whether it's a home care solution, or whether it's an early support solution that keeps you out of crisis, we have it under our umbrella. That's one of the things I love about my work at Tabitha is there's never a dull moment. But more importantly, we show up every day to connect elders and their caregivers to resources. And so we have worked very closely with aging partners, but between the two of us, I think there's probably not a service that exists in our community that we're not aware of or know how to connect you to. And that's probably a very important takeaway for you is there really are solutions to nearly every single thing that you will face. And that is the relief that ideally you would walk away with knowing. The other thing that I want to offer, and then I'd love to hear from you guys whether you think that it's accurate or not, but I'm going to go on out there and throw it out. We believe that that oftentimes what you will hear from your loved one, certainly my parents have said this to me, my mother-in-law says something different, I'm grateful for her, but we'll go back to that, and that is, I never want to live in a nursing home, and I want to stay at home, right? So we are all given that pressure. This is the set of rules in which we have to live within, right? It's a lot of pressure. My mother-in-law wants to live in an assisted living because she's wanted her whole life a maid and someone to make her meals. So first of all, start flipping the conversation around to that because that works, okay? But if that's not your reality, if we don't all have mother-in-laws like mine, we have parents like mine where it's this strict sort of no nonsense around that, here's the real question. Here's how we think about it at Tabitha. Is the truth that you never want to go to a nursing home? Is the truth that you want to always stay in your home? Or is the truth that you want your life to be the way it was before, when you were well, and your spouse was alive, and your kids came over and visited, and your grandchildren came and visited, and you had Sunday meals, and you still had taste buds where the food tasted good? Is it when you still had Friday nights to go out with friends? Is that what home really means to you? Because sometimes we are working so hard to support the fight of the life for what our parents have said the words of without fully understanding what that means. And so if what it really means is that I yearn for the socialization that I once had when I was more well, if I yearn for, that Sunday night dinner that I always got to go out to, sometimes home is nothing more than the four walls that surround you and have a roof over your head. Home is where the heart is. Okay, so when family members will come to visit me more often in a location that is more convenient to them, am I more willing to think about home in a different way? If home has under its roof tons of socialization, I love playing cards and the card group meets every day and I never have to step outside. If home means Sunday night meals in the restaurant and there's one just 3 feet down the hall from me, is that home? So I'm not trying to convince you of anything. I'm just urging you to think about what they say and what they really mean might sometimes mean two different things. And if you can just think about what the next question is to learn more, take the time to ask the next question. Is that fair? Was that your experience, Pat?
Well, I think those are great questions to ask. I think they're great things to consider. My mom and dad did not want to leave the home. Mm-hmm. And I don't know why. Mm-hmm. I don't know why they didn't want to. I don't know if it was change or. I know that my mom's mom was in a nursing home at the end of her life, and whether it was that experience or some other experience, I don't know. But my mom and dad, my mom was opposed to it. And again, like I indicated earlier, worked with aging partners and worked with the State Health and Human Services to get a Medicaid waiver for my dad. And when it was all completed and everything was ready to go, she said no. And so so my dad stayed in the home for months longer. So I don't know the reason behind that, but and I don't know where I'm going with this either, but.
But I think to your point, in some cases that home really does mean home. And so then your job is clear. It is to how to make it work in their own home the best you can.
Yeah.
And so what resources will be necessary for us to do that. Yeah. Right?
Yeah. And my mom, now my mom's in a different state of mind. She's willing, and I'm looking for a place. And so I don't, I just don't know. I never asked the question. Certainly it came up in conversations, but I never explicitly asked the question, why don't you want to do this, or why are you opposed to it? I didn't ask the question. Like I said earlier, my mom was of sound mind, and when she made a decision, I allowed her to do that, and I didn't try to be the persuader, and maybe I should have been a persuader more. I don't know, but I didn't. But now that my dad passed away, my mom is acceptable and open to looking at other options, which I'm thankful for, because she still lives in a large home that is difficult for her to maintain. And I think I've persuaded her of that fact, that you're not going to be able to mow the yard, and I blew the snow last night, and so anyway.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think, no two journeys are the same. And, you didn't need to be the persuader. Your parents were able to articulate clearly to you what mattered to them. And things do change over time. So that's the other thing. It goes back to being flexible. Like Joyce talked about, what stands today may not stand tomorrow in terms of what is important to them. And particularly when they are no longer a pair and they become one, then things really change radically, right? And so we have to be able to be flexible with that and roll with the punches. And I think we don't expect any of you who don't do this for your full-time job to know what questions to ask, or to know what does this information mean. And honestly, sometimes it means exactly what I've said, right? So I don't want to have you suggesting that everyone's just actually has an alternate meaning to what they say. In Pat's case, it was clear they didn't have an alternate meaning. It means what it means. But what I do want you to know is that as you're wondering, if you feel comfortable, wonder out loud with them. If not, talk to an expert, and we can help you maybe come up with what the next set of questions to have a better understanding is. And, this is all one step at a time, and I think that's the most important thing to remember. So I know we need to turn it over to Lori because we want to have the questions come from you. Any final remarks from Joyce or Pat before we let Lori take it away?
I would just be interested in your questions.
Well, now's the time for questions. And so if anyone, just raise your hand and I'm happy to hand you the microphone. And as you're thinking about your questions, I am going to ask one. I think part of being a caregiver, there's some anticipatory grief that goes along with it. You spend so much time with your loved one, and you're kind of preparing for something that is inevitable. And so talk a little bit about managing kind of this grief process that also goes along with being a caregiver.
Go ahead.
Well, I think sometimes the people that we're caring for are ready to talk about if, someday when they're gone or changes. But we as caregivers, sometimes we don't want to go there because it's like you were saying, we really set the standard up of we wish they were the way they were, back in the old days. And I don't know what the answer to that is, but I think accept that, give people permission to talk about it if they're willing to. And if they say something like, I feel, I'm not the same, and maybe something's happening to me, let them talk about that and explore that with them. And we do, grief is a part of life, and it's not easy, but doing it together and talking about it, I think, helps, would be the only thing I would say. you have it.
I concur. Go ahead, Pat.
My mom and dad talked about heaven a lot toward the end of my dad's life. They talked about it a lot. They wanted to go together. And so, I don't know about, I don't know about the grief, or in the end, my dad passed away a couple months ago. There's some grief and some loss and all of that. But in the condition that my dad was in, there was a lot of relief, to be honest. Knowing that it could have lingered for years, and in the state that he was in, and there was no quality of life. And even though mom and dad wanted to go together, and it didn't happen that way. And I'm sure that she had some disappointment in that. But there, don't get me wrong, we did grieve, but personally I found more relief in my dad's passing than there was grief.
Yeah, and I think in addition to that, it's grieving all along the way, right? So it's not just the loss of the person, it's the loss of what the person used to be or do. And again, to Joyce's point, the interesting thing is we're often in the same places. We're both really sad or hurting about this very similar kinds of things, but we're motored up to protect one another from the pain, right? And so instead of being honest with each other and having that conversation about how we're feeling, we both hold it in thinking we're doing the right thing. And so that's, I would just urge you to be comfortable having the conversation and also not to push it. So when you don't get a response, that means they're not ready to talk about it. But I think about this as, I remember when my girls were teenagers, and sometimes they wouldn't talk to you for days unless they needed food or money. And sometimes, they would not stop talking. And I remember telling my husband, when they're talking, we better listen, because we're learning a lifetime of information at that moment, right? But think about the person whose life you're in this caregiving role, because when they start talking, it might just be in spurts, just little nuggets that they want you to know along the way. And a sit-down, serious conversation sounds like putting toothpicks in your mouth, right, and shoving them up. But little bits at a time is so much more palatable for them, and in whatever way they decide, they think for you too. So we're going through this with my husband's dad right now. He has had, we always say 9 lives, so we never know. But right now, each visit, he's preparing us with more information. And he sort of just weaves it into the conversation like, lunch was great, and by the way, I want to make sure you have this. And then, but you could miss that. You could not notice that he is trying to send you a message of what is important to him now and after he's gone. So that listening component is so key, and noticing what is he really telling me is so, so important.
Comment just triggered a thought, and I had written that question down, and it had to do with, for those of us in the room that are older than, are retired or older, how we could pre-plan. But some of the discussion also led me in a different direction, as in we really can't, because we really don't, or I should say, don't know what kind of physical issues I'm going to experience tomorrow. Mm-hmm. So I'll skip that question. Sorry. But the one I had was, what kind of advocacy or support do you provide to us when our loved ones live in assisted living or in a nursing care facility, or any kind of advocacy for that?
There are some caregiver support groups in the community for people that's aging partners. It's not our caregiver support group, but there's a community group of volunteers that provide a caregiver education support group, and they meet at St. Paul's Methodist Church once a month.
Call you?
Yeah, and so you can call our agency to find out about that. The caregiver services that I mentioned on this flyer because even though I think sometimes people think it's a lot easier if somebody's in assisted living or nursing home, but it can also be the people around you may think, oh, it's solved now, and so you shouldn't be stressed anymore and your life is kind of going good. But it is still stressful because that person may have some concerns about having to be in those places. Maybe not, but they might. Or you may be visiting so much that your own personal life, even if you're retired, in fact, retired people tell me they are busier than people that are working. I'm not retired yet, so I don't know if that's true, but that's what they tell me. So you still may need support as a caregiver, and we haven't really said this, we've sort of alluded to it, and this is anecdotal, but sometimes when I work, especially with couples, the one that's a caregiver ends up, maybe we lose them or they become more ill than the person they're caring for. Mm-hmm. And it's easy to not notice yourself when you are so involved with the life of another person. You don't know how tired you are. Oftentimes, you talked about relief. I think also sometimes people all of a sudden get in touch with their fatigue. You know, they've been going every day, they've had that person on their mind. So you still need support, you know, even if someone's in getting their physical care and their meals and things, because it's that whole emotional part too that we talked, you know, they're still in your mind. So I encourage you to take a flyer. I encourage you to, you know, call a Continuum Navigation to get their thoughts on it, or other places in the community. But find people in your life that understand what it's like to be a caregiver would be my recommendation, and people who uplift you in that, you know, that understand that sometimes you're not going to be all hearts and flowers. You may have to complain for a half hour before you can get to, oh yeah, I do love them, you know. And you know, we do in our work, I mean, we try to be very respectful and kind, and we love what we do. And you know, when I started, I wasn't an older person, but I'm now an older person, but I totally give permission in the future for my care managers, my family, to get together and complain about me for brief periods of time, and then we can go on. And I do think another thing we haven't talked about is we must keep our sense of humor in all this. Yeah. And I love it if I go on a home visit and I can get a laugh out of somebody I'm visiting. Yeah. I consider I have done at least one good thing.
That's a win.
You know, I want to get a little laugh, and you never know where you're going to find that humor. And sometimes it's almost in the kind of sad things, but then it just is so absurd. Like you're trying to get a benefit or help for somebody, and everything goes wrong, and it just gets crazier. We tell stories, you know, of situations where something funny happened. We just have to, but we want to not laugh at people, but laugh with them. We want everybody to be together, enjoying the humor of the whole thing. So I think I got off track. Sorry.
I would just add a little bit to your question. All nursing homes, all nursing facilities will always have a social worker. And I would just say to you, unless the social worker is really where you need the advocacy, God forbid, but the social worker should always be the person who you have a very close relationship with, because he or she will be the one that is with you that entire journey. You know, there are other people who work shifts, et cetera, but generally you'll find a social worker who will come to know you and your loved one sort of inside and out, and should be able to help advocate for you through that journey. Assisted living, not so much. In the case of Tabitha, if you've contacted us and have a relationship with one of our Continuum Navigators, no matter where you end up, we can remain in an advocacy position for you. And the other part to your question that you decided not to ask is you actually can do pre-planning. You can't predict your future, none of us can, but there are a lot of crucial conversations to both think about and have with others that really can at least inform people about, if I was to write my story and it could be written the way I'd like, what would it read like? And that will really force you to think about some key things, but also help you to have conversations with people that you really want to pay attention to your wishes. And we've got some resources that can help prompt that on our website if you want to reach out to us.
And that makes me think of, as you're planning ahead, one of the things that you might want to look into, and you're kind of talking about too, I think, is surrogate decision making. If you have a caregiver in the future, what things should you have in place to assist them? The state of Nebraska has just updated a booklet on surrogate decision making that has all the laws in Nebraska regarding powers of attorney, healthcare power of attorney, living wills. So it's a nice resource to read, and you can just Google that and it'll come up, or if you have trouble finding it, call our agency, and we'd be glad to we actually have a supply that we can send out, and then those who have online access, we can send you the link. So that's something you can do ahead of time, because if you can't decide yourself, then you have something in place that you're comfortable with. It can give you some peace of mind.
Yeah, before you ask the next question, I just add on to what Christie said. I would agree with her in that, go ahead and plan. Even if the plan doesn't come to fruition, at least you've done that. I can speak from personal experience in the last couple of months. If you don't plan and you got to make last-minute decisions, they're harder decisions. They're oftentimes more costly decisions, and in the end, you potentially have conflict with the decision because you're trying to make a decision as a caregiver, and if there are siblings involved and other people involved, they may think you should have made a different decision, and I would encourage you to plan as much as possible, even if it doesn't come to fruition.
It is a gift in which you can leave for others. That's hands down.
Other questions? Yes.
Martha, you can't ask me any questions.
I'm going to. I'm not entirely sure how to phrase this, but sometimes I'm an adult. I'm a professional woman. I've been out of the house for 30-some years. I go home around my parents and my siblings, and I revert back to a person that I'm not that person anymore. How do I prepare? How do you become a caregiver to someone when all of a sudden, when to make that transition into a different role? Was that hard for you?
Are you asking me?
What a great question.
That is good.
For me, I didn't prepare for it. I should have saw it coming, but it was one of those blind spots that just went way over my head. I didn't prepare for it. I didn't plan on it, but it just, and truly, I could have refused it, but that wasn't me. I mean, yeah, it wasn't the response. Again, I go back to, I was just being a responsible son. I wasn't being a caregiver. I was just being a son. And so when the first request comes for help, you do it. And then and they become more frequent and more frequent and more frequent. And so then ultimately, in the end, you're the caregiver, and it's like, how did I get here? So I don't know how to answer your question. I just did what they wanted me to. I tried to provide help they needed, and became the caregiver, I guess.
The
We have one more question back here.
Unless someone else wants to go.
Just real quick, I want to add just a reaction to your question, because it really is a great one. And again, I mean, Pat's been such a great living example for us. But I think you speak to the reality of the world. There are so many of us where life goes on, and what we thought would be our tight family may or may not. And maybe I'm inserting some of my own issues into this, but we grow up into different people, and it's not like we're 15 and in that house again. And this is just Christie Hinrichs speaking. What I would say to you is that if you decide to step into it, and that's the thing, you have choices. Like if you decide to step back into that, then you have to receive the invitation and make it not about you. So if you decide to step in, it's about helping them navigate it. It goes back to the listening thing, because if we go back and try to put upon them who we've become, or what our ideals or what our expectations of life are, I know for me at least that would look very different than if I could just go in and be a listener and be able to follow up on what they're asking for me to be or do. Is that helpful? Hopefully.
And I'll add to that before the next question comes. My parents certainly didn't plan for that, for the last 3 years to play out like it played out. They did not plan on that at all. And frankly, they didn't like it. It wasn't in their plan for retirement. It wasn't in their plan for for their senior years. That is not what they hoped for or planned for. And so and consequently, I didn't plan for it either. So that's just the way it played out. And again, I could have refused it, but it really wasn't an option for me to do that. So.
One more question.
A friend of mine is in nursing care, a high school friend, and he had to, or he did, I should say, call and ask for support from the state ombudsperson. And I didn't know if you wanted to talk about that a little bit, because it seems like a resource.
That's a great thing that we haven't talked about, but the State Unit on Aging has an ombudsman that is there for people who are if they have a concern in assisted living or a nursing home and they can't resolve it. We always encourage everyone to try to resolve it within the facility they live in, because sometimes it's a miscommunication or a misunderstanding. But if that cannot be resolved, then they can call the State Unit on Aging. I don't know that number by heart, but again, our information assistants would be happy to get you there. And I believe it's still Penny Clark that does that. And that can be a resource. And it's a good thing, because often there's a meeting and the ombudsman and the facilities staff or people that are involved in it and the person with the concern get together and they kind of work it out, hopefully. So thank you. That's a good one for us to tell people about.
Well, thank you so much, all of you. I mean, there's just so much information. And for those of us that are in a caregiving role, you have made me feel not nearly as alone in the process. I mean, I hear a lot of the same themes and the same thoughts, the same kind of fears and emotions that you all have experienced, and so I'm grateful for that, but also grateful for all the resources that you've shared. You know, in this last couple of years, as I've become increasingly more of a caregiver for my dad, I think there are things that you really have to learn to appreciate. I mean, obviously the extra time, obviously maybe getting to know your parent or loved one better than you knew them before. I've had to learn to appreciate long drives in the country, things that make my dad really happy. I've learned where every farmer lives and what crop they raised and whether they were a good farmer or a bad farmer. But I've learned so much about where I came from, what really was happening, kind of reliving a little bit of my childhood, things that I had forgotten about, but things that I hopefully then can share with my kids someday. So as I'm listening to all this, it is a journey, but there is joy in it. There is humor in it if we choose to look at it that way. And I think it means that we just have to do it our own way and respect the wishes of our loved ones. So thank you for sharing your expertise with us. That is so helpful. And I hope that you'll join me in thanking your panel today. We do have 3 additional community conversations that will be coming up this spring. On March 1st, we will have an important discussion about postpartum depression, an issue that has affected our community in multiple ways and in sometimes very tragic ways. On April 5th, we will be having a session on Stop the Bleed, which, if any of you are aware, in our community, there has been a number of traffic accidents and other accidents that have involved I'm using words that only you can do, hemorrhagic bleeding that have resulted in a bystander having to use a tourniquet, and that has saved lives. Our own Dale Johnson, who is a fairly well-known radio personality here, that happened to him, and the story of how you can become a bystander lifesaver in using tourniquet and hemorrhagic control. We're going to be talking about that. There's also situations like what happened, unfortunately, in Las Vegas. We never would want that to happen here, but if you were ever in a situation where that happened, many of those lives were saved because of bystanders who knew those techniques. And lastly, on May 9th, we're going to talk about intergenerational poverty and how to break the cycle of intergenerational poverty. Our own state senator, former state senator, and board member here, Kathy Campbell, will be leading that discussion. But for today, thank you for this important conversation, and again, thank you all.
Thank you.